Just a quick one before we get into this episode. If you're in the UK and you use supplements, I'd highly recommend checking out Reflex Nutrition, where they're giving up to 40% on all their range if you use the code PTRNT at checkout. I've been using Reflex for nearly a decade, with their microwave being one of my favorite whey proteins. It's grass-fed, hormone-free, and digests so well compared to most on the market. Check out their full supplement range, including all your transformation basics and plant-based alternatives on reflexnutrition.com and use the code PTRNT at checkout for up to 40% off. It's not long left now until the new book, Transform Your Body, Transform Your Life, is released. Sunday, 24th of May is the big day, and I can't wait for you to get your copy. Make sure you subscribe to our email list and social media for updates on book bonuses, previews, competitions, and giveaways. Exciting times ahead. In today's episode of RNT Fitness Radio, I'm joined by long-term RNTer Stephen Smyth, an ex-army officer who comes on to talk about why long-term investment phases are so critical, as well as diving into some sage leadership and management advice from his experiences of leading big teams both in his army days and in his corporate career. If you're looking to upgrade your physique after your first checkpoint, build rules around your ultimate lifestyle, and learn leadership strategies from the best, make sure you tune into this episode. How have you found balancing young family with work, other priorities, and keeping things going whilst also making self-care an important priority for yourself?
Yeah, it's I think it was a slightly, I put some things in place before our first child arrived, and they just sort of continued. And a few of those I've taken from my previous career, and you know, I'm a sort of naturally disciplined person as a result. But you know, when it comes to training, for instance, you know, I was one of those people I'd always train in the evening, and that was just part of my routine. It would let me, you know, it was a bit like my commute when I was working in London because I didn't really have a commute. It was a bit of a walk, but you know, that kind of at the moment that half hour in the car, that commute, that's useful kind of delineation between work and life. For me, that was always training in the evening. It just formed part of my routine. It would really knock me off if it didn't happen. Switching that to the mornings and effectively just eating into the sleep that is fairly precious, as we've learned. Yeah. Looking at how my recovery works or doesn't. You know, it was a bit of a sacrifice, but actually, you know, making that a habit over time meant that, okay, well, I'm up at 5 or half 5 every day. I'm in the gym by half 6 or 7. I'm done in the office by half 8, and that means my evenings are family time. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, that was a fairly basic thing. But you know, at the time, my brain was telling me like this is awful, why are you doing it? But I was conditioned to that, you know, having at one point in the past stepped on stage with a lot of help from yourself. That was you know, the ability to just turn off those signals and realize, you know what, that's just telling me the easy option. This will pay off long term, and then it becomes habit, and then it becomes much easier to do over time.
One of the things we spoke about recently was in that transition phase, especially when your latest child was born, is the formation of rules that you've kind of kept for yourself, no matter what. There's certain things that you always do on a day-to-day basis that helps you keep self-care as a priority during a time where it's actually very easy to let it slip. You know, it's very easy when things completely change, your environment changes, your routine changes, you can let those rules slip and things sort of fall to the wayside. What are some of these rules that you've kept throughout and built upon over the years?
Yeah, that's something I've tried to think about recently, because you know, during the you know, lockdown or zombie apocalypse or whatever we're calling it, they've been important for my sanity, if nothing else. But you know, I'll probably start it off with things like you know, what am I just non-negotiable things that can't be missed. And you know, a few years ago there were a thing, you know, that was the gym. That was number one. Number two was probably video games. And you know, over time that became sort of family, and then, you know, somewhere lower down where everything I wanted to do. But you know, just making sure that I knew what those things were that had to happen each day. So you know, if nothing else happened, at least I'd keep ticking over and I'd stay sane and I'd do what I needed to do. Family wise to you know, be a good husband, be a good dad, which just helps the other side of things and as well. And then, figuring out where the flexibility is in that. And I think flexibility in those kind of types of plans for me, for somebody who's just super rooted in routine, is quite important, because the routine's important, but equally knowing that, okay, it didn't happen at 8 o'clock today, but I know that my next opportunity is kind of 6 o'clock and then sort of 9 tomorrow. Mentally I can deal with that quite easily, and it just means that it becomes less noise for me, as stuff inevitably happens and I have to change the plans, and then, hey, if 3 things go wrong in a row and something just doesn't happen, okay, that's cool. I can only plan so far ahead, but it took me a while to learn that having that rigidity was super important. It allowed me to get everything I wanted to do done, but equally it would hamstring me at times if I didn't know how to work around it when things went sideways.
It's funny, we had to actually, as for most people, it's about creating more structure and more quote unquote discipline. But for you, in many cases, we've actually had conversations about how can we reduce some of your structure, because you would beat yourself up if you didn't do a certain thing, or you beat yourself up if you missed that time or that meal. Whereas since the family's come into play, we've had to loosen the strings a little bit in order to be more flexible with those rules, but keep the rules there, but just make them more transferable as opposed to, life or death rules.
Yeah. My time in the army's got a lot to answer for. I came out of that. I was just thinking back to the check-ins I give you, back in the early days of, I had a single square of chocolate this week, so ran out an extra 2 miles. To try and balance it out. Yeah. And sort of thinking back to shit, what have I, what's every single thing that didn't exactly go to plan, that I've absolutely got to compensate for, and then sort of realizing that, I am that person who's pretty rigid and who I guess thrives on that kind of rule set. But at times it's detrimental. But I am the person if you tell me to run that wall, I won't stop to say how fast.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've seen some of your training videos, and it's like there's very few people that can go to that level of intensity that you cultivate. And I think that's one of your strongest attributes, is being able to literally run into the wall. Tell us about where that came from, and potentially your earlier days with that root of this behavior and mindset that you have now.
Yeah, I was thinking about it, and I thought it came from some time in the army, but I think it has to have been there beforehand, because it's an attribute that, having spent some time in the army and then seeing how they recruit as well, is something that they go looking for. So clearly somebody saw that when I was going through the process of trying to get in. But mindset wise, I think it's simply some internal determination and competitiveness with other people, which over time, and especially the game of fitness, you sort of realize that's really just competing with yourself. You're better than you were yesterday. That particularly when it comes to something like thinking about physique shows or bodybuilding specifically, well, there's no point in trying to compete with somebody else, because you've got no idea of their context or their genetic background. You've got to compete with the last time you were a particular level of leanness, or the last your last set or whatever. So it took a while for me to learn how to shift that internal competitiveness from thinking about everybody else to thinking about, okay, well, what can I impact? What can I affect? And that was me. So that's probably been there for a while. That is cultivated in the army a lot. You are through every single bit of training that you do, you're measured against other people. You're encouraged to get ahead. A basic PT session. It's kind of elbows high, get to the top of that hill, pace to be a winner because the last one's going twice. That's just the type of mindset he was drilled in from day one. But equally, just being able to get on with it and laugh off the fact that everything's pretty horrible right now. Isn't that hilarious? I'm getting shot at from 3 angles. I'm pretty sure I just heard a bomb go off. One of my guys has just dropped a really important piece of kit that we need to communicate. It's probably not useful. And someone else is asking me where our lunch is. You need to be able to kind of deal with that and just get through what is that's a bit of a specific example I'm giving you, but it that kind of stuff does happen.
Talk about that. I want to hear more about that.
Yeah, just the times when you perhaps I've been away, with a team on a all expenses paid trip to the desert, and you find yourself in these situations where, thinking about it in retrospect, you think that's crazy, but actually at the time, having been through, you don't just get deployed out somewhere, on a tour with the army. You spend 6 months to a year beforehand training, so you drill it. And back to your original question of how do I get those rules in place? Well, everything in the army is a drill. Everything. So, and by that I mean, a drill is something. When you see people marching around a parade square, they call that drill because you've done that 50 times beforehand, so you can do it with your eyes closed. So if somebody gets a word of command wrong, you realize that you don't do the wrong thing and you do what's expected. And the same thing goes for getting out onto an operational tour. You've spent 6 months going through a number of different training scenarios, living with the small group of guys and girls you're going to be taking out there and being responsible for. So you know each other inside and out, and you've effectively rehearsed everything day in, day out, so that by the time it comes to for real and the training wheels are off, everything's familiar. You know how everybody's going to react, and you know how you're going to react, and you just know what needs to get done, and it becomes a lot less hard as a result. So I think distilling that down, rehearse, repeat, and just setting those things up as muscle memory, either mentally or otherwise, is something I've taken away as being quite useful, and that does help me sort of drill routines, just thinking about stuff like that. If I do it enough times, I think I heard Terry Crews talk about this, where he swears he got really, really out of shape. I've never seen any pictures of that dude out of shape. And he says, I got this beer belly, which probably meant he was down to an 8-pack. But he said, I got back into it, and I knew if I could do it for 28 days straight, then it was set, and that was my routine was completely set in. I think whatever that figured a period of time, a number of iterations you need to bed something in, and then it just becomes the way, it becomes something you do, and actually it's harder to not do it over time than to keep doing it. That's quite worked for me.
Absolutely. With the army, which tours were you doing? How long were you there for? What made you join the army? Tell us a bit more about this.
Well, I joined. I came from an army family, so it's something I'd thought about for quite some time. I actually tried when I was at home in Ireland before I went to university, and I was actually found out I was mildly colourblind, so I failed the medical for the Irish Army. Whereas for the British Army, they just say there's some jobs you can't do as a result of that, like bomb disposal, cut the wrong wire, that kind of thing. So they're a bit more pragmatic about it. But I went off to university, so I thought I'd never pursue a career in the military, and did engineering, and then moved to London because there were no jobs in Dublin at the time, which is slightly ironic given that it's a tech hub now, with Google and Facebook and everybody else set up there. So I moved to London to get a job, and then found out I could actually join the British Army, and thought that was for me. So the motivation came from probably some family, but actually in terms of the why, which I think is pretty important for a lot of people, is it wasn't just a case of, well, my dad did it, so I should. But as I was starting off my career in engineering, I was missing, camaraderie that wasn't really there in the office environment that I was in. It was a good team, it was really good fun, but I was reading a lot at the time in terms of a little bit of military history, a decent amount of kind of military fiction as well, and what I was after was just that team environment that would allow me to be part of something that was capable of doing something far greater than the sum of those parts. That in the end was probably the clincher for me in terms of why to join up. I wanted to be involved in the types of things that they were doing at the time, and I had a few friends who had joined, there's a lot of marketing spin in terms of what you can get up to as a soldier or an officer in the army. And there are plenty of jollies to be had. I had some time skiing and some time snowboarding and doing some other stuff, and jumping out of airplanes. A lot of the time, you're going to spend a lot of time polishing stuff, man. Polishing stuff, yeah. Polishing your boots, polishing your weapon, polishing some silverware. That's just really just a metaphor for it. There's a lot of downtime doing really, really mind-numbingly droll stuff. It's not all firing big guns and jumping out of airplanes, but there is fun to be had. But I joined the Royal Artillery as an officer. I came, at that meant I was responsible for groups of people of varying sizes that just got slightly larger over the years, and either preparing them to go and go on a tour of somewhere like Iraq or Afghanistan or somewhere else, or a really large scale training exercise, and living with those people and being responsible for them, kind of day in day out. Their physical training, their mental preparation, setting up their education for various things, which is completely subjective, which is really quite satisfying, quite rewarding. I've always enjoyed developing people, but that's what I got out of it. Eventually, you get dragged kicking and screaming off to a desk, and that happened. And at that point, I probably started looking at the door. I thought it was time to go. I'd also met my other half at the time, and she would have never agreed to marry me if I was going to stay in the army. So it was a few things sort of made me think, I've had my fun. It's time to go.
How long were you there for?
About 10 years.
Oh, wow.
In the end. So it didn't really feel like that. Maybe at times it did. But yeah, after 10 years, I stepped back out into the real world. And I had to figure out what I was going to do.
And which tours did you do then? You did the Iraq?
So first I went to Iraq, and then Afghanistan a few years after that. Pretty much 3 years apart, because that was kind of the norm at the time. Between 6 months of preparation, 6 to 9 months of preparation, a tour of 6 to 7 months, a period of recovery as you moved around different regiments or moved to a different unit, and then start again to then go out again. So I got through 2 of those iterations, plus some desk jobs, plus a few fun jobs, and some downtime. And that took about 10 years start to finish.
Awesome. Where were you? What kind of rank did you achieve in that 10-year space?
I got up to the rank of major only just because I actually retired immediately after I promoted, which probably didn't look great on paper. But as an officer, you'll come out of Sandhurst as a second lieutenant. You'll then promote to lieutenant, and then captain, and then major. And you'll do various different jobs that sort of changes as your rank changes. That usually involve just looking after more and more people, which was sort of the path I was on. But like I said, at the time, I thought, all of the fun jobs were behind me, and all the jobs ahead of me are kind of a little bit more desk bound, or probably have a lot more responsibility than really I think I'm up for right now. It sounded like a lot of work.
Yeah.
And a lot of time away from home.
How many sort of people were you looking? How many people were you looking after?
Initially, I had about 40 as a second lieutenant, and that would grow and grow. Had I stayed another couple of years, I would have had what a unit called a battery, which would have been 100, 120 people.
Oh wow!
So it really does just to kind of increase over time. But it's usually quite that you have a bunch of characters to look after. So as difficult as it can be to look after large numbers of people, you'll be kept smiling.
That's incredible. I mean, what did you learn about management and leadership from your days in the army? Because I'm sure there's a lot of transferable lessons to what you do now in your corporate job. What did you learn about management and leadership that you've carried over? And what have you seen to be the real good traits of leaders in the army? Yeah,
I think probably that they're 2 very, very separate things. And the army and actually the forces in general spend a lot of time talking about leadership, educating people on leadership. Sandhurst is considered a center of excellence, and there are a lot of academic space there, who are researching leadership. But even that's not just vested in officers. A soldier who joins up, from day one, will be given leadership opportunities, and it's sort of drilled into you day in, day out. Every training exercise you go on, you'll be assessed in some form in terms of your ability to lead. Management, is I think of, and the army sort of thinks of very, very much like, it's kind of process. It's like, can you move these numbers around? Have you made sure you've done this thing on time? It's very much thinking about kind of black and white tick boxes. Whereas leadership is you could ask 10 different officers and academic leadership academics what leadership means, and they give you different answers. The motto of Sanders is serve to lead, and you can interpret that as you will. But for a lot of people, it means you work for the people who work for you, and you think about them first. There's a common phrase we use is you get in off an exercise where all you really want to do is climb into bed, where actually you've got a whole lot of stuff to do beforehand because you haven't slept in 5 days, but you need to fight that and get that stuff done first, which is my men, my equipment, myself, and you're thinking about stuff like that, putting yourself last, and thinking about the others, what they need, over and above your own wants and your own priorities. Takes a bit of a mental shift, takes some practice, and takes some failure as well. But what they're thinking, the really good traits, well, they're probably the people who care about their people, and get that they work for them, but they probably report to somebody else. I think is an important distinction. And if you're in a leadership position and you don't care about your people, you're probably in the wrong place.
Have you carried that over to your role now in your day-to-day work? Is it
absolutely.
A scenario where you're leading from the back?
It's it's something that there are absolutely times where you need to lead from the back, and there are absolutely times where you need to lead from the front. And you're never going to be 100% right about that. But where you've got the people, you're trying to develop them, and you really, really want them to be stretching into a role and growing. You need to resist the temptation of doing the job for them. Equally, where times are tough, and you've got two options. You've got the right thing to do, and you've got the easy thing to do. And that some people are going to go on that easy route. Well, you need to show them, and you need to show them you're going to do it first. And so a lot of the time, I find myself trying to walk that that fine balancing act, while at the same time teach my own team leads. So in my position, I'm a manager. I've got a number of team leads who then run their own teams, and I'm trying to educate them about those kind of principles. Probably one of the big things I found is that the type of training around leadership and development into it outside of the army is very, very different, and sometimes is based on your technical skill and your technical nous. But saying to somebody that technically you're really, really good at a particular job, let's say it's software engineering, and you wrote the best algorithm ever. Here's 20 people to look after. But that's just the way in so many different industries. I've been through a few different jobs since I left the army. I've been very, very lucky to settle down in a place that's really worked out for me. But the general model of people progress in a particular technical trade and then progress up into management. You can't rely on the technical nous to filter out the people who are who are going to be really good leaders. You need to think about it far earlier. So that's probably been something I've tried to concentrate on, and will continue to take over lessons from the army and use over time, because it is fairly timeless when it comes to teaching people how to look after others. That's
really interesting. They talk about technicians sometimes are just better staying technicians and getting better at their craft, and some people are meant to be managers, some people are meant to be leaders. It's like the whole, you get a barber who's good at cutting hair, so he decides to open a barber shop, but he doesn't know how to run a business, so he just ends up being all over the place. And I guess that can be applied in all situations. And you're basically mentioning that the model of you get good at being a technician, so you're given a new role which you're not good at. That's it's a weird one, but it seems to be only consistent. It's especially consistent in the corporate world, right?
It is, and I saw it in my previous role, which was in one of the large banks. I've seen it in my current role as well, and it's I can understand coming coming from somewhere that was absolutely an organization that was about leadership, kind of through and through, to into the business world, which is very much about being a business, and that developing people's ability to to do their jobs better is where the focus is, and then worrying about which ones sort of emerge as the worthwhile managers and leaders can be a secondary concern, but thinking about the split between management and leadership is equally challenging, because I do think they're very, very different things. And so looking at, judging that sort of progression of people through the technical ranks and saying, they'd make a really, really good manager, and only looking at their ability to kind of follow process and tick boxes is very, very different to finding somebody who can motivate a group of people through adversity, and really galvanize people around an idea to deliver something, through challenges over time. They're two really, really distinct and different things in my books.
What about culture and camaraderie? What really stuck out to you in the army as a definitive model for culture and camaraderie between a band of brothers or a group of people who are working towards that same mission and goal?
There are a number of things, and you can. A lot of it's based around healthy rivalry. If you're, let's say you're in a troop that's inside of a larger battery, and a troop would be, there'd be three in a battery. Well, if you're in Troop A, well, everybody in Troops 3 and C are dickheads. And that's just it. But the second you're with some people from the remainder of your battery within the larger regiment, well, then everybody in that battery is your family, and everybody from the other batteries in the regiment, well, they're dickheads. And so on and so forth. Then eventually it gets to the point of you're in Twickenham once a year for the Army Navy game, and everybody around you who's wearing an Army t-shirt, well, they're your family, and everybody's wearing a Navy t-shirt. Well, you know what? You wouldn't break yourself and crossing the road. To answer your question, that sort of comes back to just fostering relationships within groups of people from the get-go. Getting people to identify in a slightly tribal fashion, I suppose, around that group of people that is effectively their close-knit unit of however larger size or smaller size, is something that's done from the point of somebody arriving in. When somebody arrives new in, believe me, that there's probably an element of hazing, and you've got to earn your place there, and you've got to be trusted, which means proving yourself. But as soon as you do, you're in, and you're part of that, and then that scales up, however large the organization. So I think at the core of it, a really significant element of that is trust. When it comes to units in the Army, there's a real expectation that you can turn your back and that person is covering off an area that you're not looking at right now, or doing something that you just don't have the time to look at right now, even if it's to the detriment of their sleep, their free time, their own, maybe even their own safety. But that ability to know what the unit is thinking about collectively, making sure everything's covered off collectively without really having to communicate, and just working for each other and pulling in the same direction over time. Possibly linked to a little bit of the camaraderie I spoke about earlier on. Those things are probably seem quite ephemeral and difficult to nail down, but you do see them emerge over teams like that over time. But it does take time to earn the trust for somebody to fit into that.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the sleep thing, the sleep sacrifice. I think I recall you saying once you did a sleep challenge. I don't know if it was a challenge or a test that they put you through whereby you weren't allowed to sleep.
Yeah, it's something you've got to get used to. So at some point you'll be tested with varying levels of lack of sleep. Every training exercise you do, whether it's during your initial training when you're, at Sandhurst or on basic training, or even thereafter, after you come out of basic training and you are now either a commissioned officer or a qualified soldier, and you're working your way up through the ranks and you're working at a unit. Every training exercise will have an element of sleep deprivation built into it, because if you're allowing for people to have 8 to 10 hours a day, well, that's 8 to 10 hours you're not training. But equally, when it comes to actually doing this stuff for real, the enemy aren't going to stop and wait for the alarm clock to go off. They're probably going to come at you in the middle of the night when they think you're chilling out. So you need to be prepared for that. You need to know the effects that it's going to have on you. But equally, there are some particular training exercises. One of which was at Sandhurst called what was it called? I think it was called First Encounter, which was affectionately known as Worst Encounter, and it wasn't just a sleep deprivation exercise. It was also a defensive exercise, which meant that you were digging trenches in terms of you were in a defensive posture rather than kind of advancing across a large open plain, looking for the enemy. You were very much sort of hunkered down, building up defenses, and waiting for somebody to come and attack you, which is a very different mindset and a different way of working for a unit in the army. Digging trenches is hard work, like really hard work. When you've got a standard issue spade and you're wearing body armor, and you're gradually less and less rested. And the whole point of doing it, using a digging exercise as the medium to get used to sleep deprivation, it's a really good way of keeping you going. And equally, when you start digging a trench, well, it's probably because the enemy's going to show up at a particular time, so you actually do not stop until you've got that thing dug, and you've got some hard cover to get behind. So that's the reason. In the end, I think I went about 3.5-4 days without sleep.
Wow.
Man, I was hallucinating. like something awful by about the end of day 2. I think by the middle of day 3, I saw it was in an area called Thetford, near Norwich, and I was seeing penguins in the middle of that training area. I'm not kidding, man. Because you'll end up going and doing most of your kind of little sort of different test exercises or serials as they're called, usually at night time. It's a good test of your navigation skills. You can do it by night as well. But at night time you've got like moonlight and shadow, and that just messes with your brain. So at the best of times you can probably sort of half see something you didn't think was there and then realize, no, that's some bad lighting. 2 days in, when I don't know why your brain's running on. It's got to be some form of ketosis by then, because you've just got nothing left. You've got no sleep, and every calorie you take in is kind of keeping your thinking machine alive. It gets confused by the most basic of things.
And when you say no sleep, are you literally talking 0 hours?
Oh yeah, man, like 0 hours. The one bit of sleep I got was standing up as everybody stopped for a brief pause and somebody wanted to check the map. And I genuinely went to sleep standing up. It was like a couple of minutes, and then somebody tapped me on the shoulder to say, "Why aren't you moving?" And at that point, I thought, you know what, I'm shagged. That's
Coffee allowed? Called caffeine?
Yeah. You absolutely smash caffeine. Everybody brings, like those little go gels you'll see cyclists have. You can just kind of squeeze into your mouth. Yeah. Those kind of things. Caffeine drinks if you can fit them in. But to be fair, that's all just extra weight you've got to carry in your Bergen, which is pretty heavy anyway. But yeah, by the end of day 3, as we got to the point of the exercise finished, I was sat in the trench that we dug with blistered hands, waiting for the enemy to show up, who were all played by the Gurkhas who support training at Sandhurst. And I remember looking through my binoculars into the middle of our defensive position, seeing the directing staff who were assessing us, and could see a cage of monkeys balancing on one of those officers' heads. And I took the binoculars down. I could see the same officer there because he was only a few hundred meters away. No cage. Binoculars back up. Cage of monkeys. And that was the second point that I sort of stopped and thought, I'm beyond saving here. So I got to the we got to the end of the exercise. Everybody got on the buses to get bus back to Sandhurst. Slept for the entire way there. Well, we stopped at one point at motorway services. I had about 3 Burger Kings, and then we got home and I slept for something like 36 hours straight.
Really? Wow.
Less for like a couple of wake ups to use the lube. That was it. It took its toll. I lost about 12 kilos that week.
What? 12 kilos?
Yeah, man. I gained it back pretty quickly. Don't get me wrong.
Well, it just goes to show, if you ever want to know the power of sleep and what it does for you, there it is.
Yeah, man, your brain needs it. It really does.
Funny, because a lot of things we talk about now are around your sleep and making sure that we get that dialed in, because you're actually someone who needs that sleep. I mean, everyone needs 7-8 hours, but I think you're especially sensitive to not getting that.
Yeah, I actually am, and there are loads of coping strategies you can go through to try and get used to it. And I've got some friends who were really, really good at doing that. It's something I used to speak to people about in the army, just because I knew I didn't deal with it that well. None of it worked for me. Not even the slightest. And then you and I found that even small changes or interruptions can have a real impact. That was probably unsurprising in retrospect. But yeah, I've got this kind of sweet spot of it's minimum 8 hours and quality sleep as well. That's where things like we played around with a bit of zinc and stuff like that. And before I go to bed, generally sort of help with quality of sleep. But I've got this cliff edge where it's either sufficient amount of sleep or I'm in rag order the next day, and there's very little in between. But then we equally did some bloods a few times, found that my testosterone's not exactly great. It's not quite at the threshold where the NHS would class it as low and would do anything about it, so I just have to deal with it. So my whole ability to recover is not brilliant, and as a result, it's probably something you and I have ended up focusing on quite a lot. But hey, it's just one of those areas that you figure out what your weak spots are, and you try and plug those gaps.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about what we've spoken about a lot with your recovery, with your sleep, with your lifestyle, because I think there's a lot to be said for some of the realizations and insights we've gained over the years, where we've kind of really honed in on what works for you, what doesn't work for you. And it's actually a lot of the opposite to typical advice of training, say 4 or 5 days a week, smashing it to the ground. Whereas with you, it's actually, in more cases than not, it's actually backing off regularly. That's been the real game changer for you. Let's talk about that and how we've managed to have that coach-client relationship, because I think there's something to be said for the investment that we both put into harnessing a really productive coach-client relationship that's allowed us to have really fruitful, productive investment phases. So let's talk more about that and dive into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're right. It's something. It doesn't come naturally to me because like I said, you're in my previous career, you were absolutely encouraged to just go to 100%. And if we're doing a PT session, you stop doing press ups or squats or whatever at the point that your eyes are bleeding. That was just the way. That's absolutely fantastic for instilling a sense of determination in somebody and giving somebody the experience of knowing what it's like to push past the point of your body saying no and your brain saying no and keeping going, and then finding your actual point of physical failure or exhaustion. It is absolutely terrible for somebody who's pursuing muscle gain because you are filling up that recovery cup to the point of overflowing really, really easily. But I had done that for so long over such a period of time, it was just natural. So when you initially you'd give me make it an 8 out of 10, or go to the point where you've only got 2 reps left. Well, I was going way too far because it wasn't. It was an 8 out of 10. But those last 2 reps would probably involve me kind of like biting a part of my tongue off and shitting myself at the same time just to get them out. That's with terrible form. That's not really, what you'd intended.
Well, I've just got a caveat here. Sorry to interrupt. I've just got a caveat because I don't want people listening to this and thinking they've got to start going only 2 reps shy of failure, because Steve's version of 2 reps in the tank is probably most people's versions of that set is done. So that's the reason why I had to tell him to just dial it back, because his 10 out of 10 was, it was biting his tongue off. It was eyes bleeding out of his head, which, is great. It's great for intensity, but doing that on a 3-4 times a week with a stressful job and young kids is going to be a recipe for tipping that stress cup over and over again. So I just wanted to add that caveat in there before you carry on.
So everybody else, sorry, when I can share the 10, you go for it.
Yeah, go for the 10. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's not something that is particularly helped. Let's be honest. By most of the media you'll see around fitness, you'll see a lot of YouTube videos of people hitting beast mode, whatever you want to call it, and they're super jacked, dudes or dudesses, and they're capable of doing that over time. Great. If they've done that and they've been assisted in doing so and they've not been forthcoming about that, well, you could be somebody who's at the beginning of your fitness journey, and you see it and think, well, that's the way I've got to train. They've gotten huge, and that's the way they train, and they're espousing that particular way of going about it, and they're going to absolute failure and then doing 10 more, and not sort of realizing that if you're sat there and you're unassisted, or you're somebody who is just generally going to have some recovery issues anyway, that's really going to be to the detriment of what you want to get long term. And so I was actually one of those people. I read all the magazines. I follow a whole lot of people on YouTube and Instagram and everything else. And as ever, it's been sort of time and experience that's taught me that context is key. And not everybody got that way, and got the way they look, either as big or as ripped as they are by doing giant sets to failure day in, day out. They may not have ever done it. They may have just done it for that video.
Absolutely. And it's been a lot of retraining of your mindset around that. And what we sort of settled on now is typically 3 days a week is working well for you. 3 days a week, couple reps in the tank, which for most people will probably be technical failure. Couple reps in the tank, and just backing off on a regular basis as well. We implement quite a few deloads. We know when you're hitting the red line. But all of this comes from being able to be a good client and being able to give what we need and actually embrace the process, as opposed to just expecting it to all show up in one day. Tell us what it takes to be a good client and embrace this journey. Because I don't remember the last time you missed a check-in. I don't think you have in the last 3 years.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, you've never missed a check-in. You've never, very rare, every week you send training videos. Like everything you're doing is so good as a client. It's why you can get to a point where we can really understand your body. But what does it take to embrace and lean into the journey like you have?
I think some of what you just spoke about is an element of discipline, and checking just happened because that's just what I do at that time of the week. Believe there have been times where I've been close to being pretty late. This week is as close as I came to that actually. But a combination of lockdown and just looking after the kids, and a 2-year-old whose favorite habit is trying to kill himself. Just means that you gotta be on top of your game for some stuff and let some of the stuff slide. But no, in terms of that client relationship, for me, it's been honesty has been pretty key, and you'll hopefully agree that I'll try and tell you everything that I think matters, and then ask you if there's something else I need to be thinking of. And we've gotten to a format that kind of works in terms of check-ins, but equally, it's not just a single email a week. It ends up being a conversation, and they're not in isolation of one another. So, taking what you've learned from last week's check-in and, the check-in, even a year ago, and applying that over time, has gotten us to the point of, we've added that all up over time, and we know what works, we know what doesn't. And we've settled on the kind of 3 days a week, at the moment. Believe me, if it was feasible, I'd be doing more, because I enjoy it, whether or not it would be detrimental to my progress, given kind of recovery issues we talked about, don't know. But using all of that, and keeping keeping a picture, keeping sight of the bigger picture and not just each week down the drinking straws has been, I think, pretty key.
I think the trial and error element is important there, in that if something doesn't work, it's not you throw your toys out the pram. It's okay, let's try something different.
Yeah.
And it's keeping that growth coachable mindset towards, okay, how can we progress forwards here?
No, absolutely. I mean, you look at, and quite rightly, a lot of literature that out there that will talk about, the hypertrophy seen, for a group of people doing particular exercise over time, for leg development, you'll hear so many coaches talk about the squat, and they'll be absolutely honest, like, in terms of bang for your buck, this is the thing to do. For years and years and years, I was absolutely, trying to improve and making really small gains, and at no point did I ever get close to squatting my own body weight. And we sort of came to the conclusion, you know what, Steve, they're not for you. Let's try something else. So you have to be willing to accept that advice, and take it as it's not a failure. It was a learning opportunity. That one didn't work, so we figured out what does.
Yeah. How do you keep an eye on the bigger picture of long-term investment and growth phases that you've embarked upon? How do you not get bogged down by the week to week, which often you can't see much visible change in a week to week, even feeling wise? Is sometimes it can be. It's very much a phase of intangible gains. How do you keep an eye on that bigger picture?
Yeah, I think for me, I when you and I started out, I didn't have that. I sort of I came to you probably with an idea of hey, that dude in that movie, I want to look like that. Clearly, I didn't have a clue how it worked, including my own body. But then, getting to the point of, I guess, to initially answer your question, I think a little bit of experience has probably gone a long way to know, okay, well, what realistically can you change over time in what period? So, for instance, a dieting phase, which I'm not in at the moment, but I know that in about 6 weeks I can be in pretty decent shape. In 12, I can be pretty peeled. I've got the discipline to do that. So, ride it out when it comes to the off season, and the fact that I generally grow a stomach above my ass on my love handles after so much as looking at a cheat meal, and we'll still have a visible 6 to 8 pack, but that's just how my body stores fat. Well, except move on, longer term, I know that I can get back to where I want to be pretty quickly. So that's one side of it, and then the other side of it is having an idea of, well, where do we want to go? So I made a decision, a few years ago, we talked about this, what was my long-term gain? Well, I want to get to the point of carrying enough size that I can walk around relatively lean all year, with the ability to dial it in over, probably about a 6-ish week period where it needs to be at most. Whereas at the moment, I'll probably need closer to the 12-week period, given how deeply we're digging. Getting to that point is what I'm absolutely focused on. But that required some introspection, informed by the experience that we had over the last few years, getting very, very lean for competition, and then just generally trying to build muscle over longer periods. How slow a process that is, and get comfortable with half a kilo a year if you're lucky, depending on your age, of lean tissue growth, and then that gives you some perspective of what to expect in the future. So I think it's been a little bit of experience, a little bit of discipline, and just being honest with myself as to what can I achieve in the period of time that I've got before I want to get to a point of relative maintenance, but still progressing.
Yeah. What sort of indicators do you use for yourself on a more micro basis, on a weekly and monthly basis? How do you keep yourself driving towards that bigger picture vision that you have for yourself? Well,
I think you've got to have something you can measure. I'm going through this with my team at work at the moment, with setting their objectives for the coming year, because it's annual review time. And the easiest way I think about that is the acronym. SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, time bound. If you can't quantify something and kind of measure it and appreciably box it out, then it's not really something you can aim for. So you can say, I want to get bigger, and that's actually no use to anybody, because you can do that inside of a day, you can do that inside of a week, but what's the quality of what you produced? Whereas by being specific and having an idea of, well, what are those little things I can watch over time to give me an indication of what I'm progressing on. That's been super useful. Really good examples, is training logs. And we've, even quite recently made some fairly serious changes to how I record, my own training. I record absolutely everything. I can look at my reps and sets going back about 3 or 4 years now. But just implementing a really kind of basic sort of grading scheme most recently, and looking at which allows you to look at it far higher, from far higher perspective, to look at trends over time, has been really, really useful. And so week on week, being able to see that progress, I can step into the gym, I can miss a rep on something and then absolutely smash out on something else, and be able to recognize that blip where I missed a rep for exactly what it was. That's just a blip. And by the same token, I can miss a few things one day and think, what, I don't, there's something wrong today, and I'm not going to be progressing on last week. Just focus on maintaining what I hit last week, and taking that as a win. But equally, it doesn't have to be progress in terms of numbers, kind of week on week. The quality of what you're doing, the perception of difficulty, everything else, all these little things that you've sort of introduced over time as viable ways of assessing progress. When you are dealing with such small percentages, has been really, really useful. But if you go in with the mindset of I want to see this massive change over this next week or these next 2 weeks, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. Knowing where you can influence things is really important, and knowing what to measure, despite how small that measurement might be, has really paid off.
What Steve's mentioning there was the red, amber, green strategy on your training log. So if you improved, you put it in green. If you stay the same, amber. And if you regressed, in red. It sounds super simple, but it gives you that snapshot of where you're at with your training logs, and if there's a cause to panic, or if there's a cause to just say, okay, that's just a blip, and continue as normal.
Yeah, it's been eye-opening, that such a small change made kind of so far down the line could have such a significant impact on how I look at tracking progress over time. Sort of proved that that hey, it's never too late to make a positive tweak to what you think is a fairly kind of set in stone set of rules that you're following.
Awesome. So Steve, how's your life transformed on the RNT journey so far?
So far, I think I'm probably I'm far mellower with my training and my my view of progress over time than perhaps I was beforehand. And I think as a result, that progress is actually far better by putting the right sort of structures in place and just figuring out what works for me, but equally knowing where, I spoke about flexibility earlier on, but it is pretty important where that flexibility is, and how to make up for either lost time or misses, and not stress about it and just get on with it, and still achieve what you want to over a slightly larger period of time, has been super useful, and that for me I think has probably allowed me to consistently progress over a much longer period of time than perhaps I would have previously. Whereas I think I used to be in the cycle of go as hard as I can, hit a brick wall, get injured, whatever, setback, and then start again almost. Whereas actually, pulling that progress through a much longer period of time and avoiding the setbacks, or avoiding them as best you can. I mean, you can't avoid getting kind of, getting a cold middle of winter, that's going to set you back. But being able to work around that, and really just magnify those changes over time, which it will if you tie it all together without significant setbacks, has been a real change. And it's in large part, I think, down to some of the things we've changed that have just allowed me to train kind of live the way I want to, and make sure that training fits into it rather than, the other way around. Has just meant that I think the quality of what we've achieved over the last couple of years has been far better.
Amazing, truly amazing. What advice, if you had to give one piece of advice to a fellow RNTer who's on their journey right now, what would it be?
Well, I suppose that will probably depend on the stage.
Let's say they're at that first checkpoint where they've got into the shape of their life and they're wondering what to do next.
Yeah, okay. That's something I can actually relate to. I think that probably the best shape I've been in has been right before I stepped on stage. And well, not everybody's going to be aiming for that level of leanness. There are a few things that are, I think, really, really important. Understand what it's going to do to you in terms of just kind of your perception of how you look and your progress, because chances are you're not going to stay looking exactly that way for a long period of time. You'll either get leaner or you'll bulk up a little bit and be happy with that. Know how to get back to it if you need to or if you want to, and what your route back to that level is. And equally, if it's a level of condition that you're not able to maintain over time because it's just going to be unpleasant, then take it for what it is. Take it as that peaking point, that point of achievement, and take away that achievement for what it is, and then know and be happy with what your settling point is going to be. So, in my case, I obviously was never going to be in stage shape long term. But that was something you actually taught me about. And then we've had some subsequent diets as well. And so that's mentally prepared me for the fact that we can get to a point of leanness that sort of probably overshoots slightly. And then we'll probably settle back to a level that is completely maintainable and allows for a lot of flexibility with, diet and, just going out and maybe even having a beer every now and then, and just enjoying life, with the family. So having that idea of your aim point where you'll settle down, and then, okay, we'll know what you want to do next. So if all you're focused on, get to this level of leanness, get to this level of leanness, get to this level of leanness, and then you get there, if you haven't thought about what's next, okay, you probably need to have an idea about what that is. And if you don't know, ask your coach, because they're the ones who are going to be able to, if you haven't been through this process before, you actually need their input, and take that advice to heart as well. You may decide, what, I want an 8-pack forever, but if you're feeling awful, then that's probably not a compromise you really want to make long term. And if you've got a family, they probably wouldn't thank you for it.
Absolutely. So what's next for Steve
then? Well, training wise at the moment, we're going to continue this long off season to the point where we think there's, I can step off the gas slightly in terms of the muscle gain, lean out and walk around pretty happy most of the year, and then dial it in for that kind of 4 to 6 week period where I know I'm going to be heading to the beach or something. I still think I've got some solid to put on, which twas ever thus. I'm not sure that'll ever change. But that for me is probably, I was kind of hoping it to be this year. I don't know if it is. We'll see at the point where I'll probably get a little bit too put on a bit too much winter timber, and we trim some back, which is something you and I got to chat about in the next few check-ins, and we'll decide when that's going to be. But that is back to one of your previous questions about staying motivated over time. That's absolutely what where I want to get to, and the by focusing on that and knowing that, okay, well, I've got fewer diets ahead of me than I do have behind me, and the systems I've built up over time that'll let me maintain that. Mean that it's an easier thing to stare down at over time. But training wise, that's absolutely what I'm focused on, and hopefully not spending too many more deep off seasons with some epic love handles.
So Steve's a testament to someone who really embraces the fluff, and we do like a strong off season and an investment phase, because ultimately it works. If you want to build some size and you want to get stronger, you have to accept a little bit of extra fluff in order to enjoy the rewards later on. If you know you can get lean, and what Steve's working towards here is that lifestyle solution where you're lean year round, you can enjoy your life, and it's not too much trouble in doing so and keeping that. But in order to get there, you have to be able to go through that long building phase, which sometimes can be a little bit unpleasant if you're not used to it. But it's the rewards are always well worth it.
No, too right. I mean, don't get me wrong. I have loved 0 seconds of every diet we've done. But you can, you've absolutely got to look at slightly longer term. What am I getting out of this? That first time where we dieted down and actually had not just kind of a hint of some abdominals, but some abs that were popping, and it was genuinely strong. That was a revelation. And then I'm still sort of not surprised, but it's still this is awesome moment as we run through subsequent diets, and actually it gets a little bit easier and we can do it more quickly because we know which levers to pull and which buttons to press. That experience you build up over time is really, really good, and it's the novelty doesn't really wear off.
Amazing. Thanks so much for coming on, Steve.
Not at all. Like it's chat.
Thank you so much for being here today on this episode of RNT Fitness Radio. I'd love for you to do a quick little favor for us. Please head over to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating, leave a comment, and share it with your family and friends. If you're interested in learning more about how to transform your body and positively change your life, go to www.rntfitness.com and explore all our free content on offer. Thank you.